The lights of the showroom, like prying paparazzi, caught every curve and shine of metal out of the darkness, turning ordinary cars into gods on pedestals. Buyers, like moths to the light, circled around, their eyes greedily devouring the perfection of forms, their dreams painting pictures of limitless possibilities. Salesmen, dressed in impeccable suits, like predators, waited for their hour, ready at any moment to unleash a wave of charm and professionalism on potential victims. Suddenly, the glass doors, like a portal to another world, opened, and a man entered the salon. He was a gray blur against the background of this lustrous splendor. An old black t-shirt, worn jeans, sneakers that seemed to have seen more roads than all the cars on display here combined. A lone silhouette, like a lost wanderer, he seemed out of place, an outsider in this realm of luxury. "I'd like to see the car," he said, his voice calm and quiet, barely discernible amidst the noise and gloss. Sophia, the young receptionist girl, smiled, trying to hide her involuntary surprise. "Of course, sir. Please wait a moment. Someone will be right with you to help you." But before she could call out to any of the salesmen, Tim, cocky and arrogant like a peacock spreading its tail, jumped up to the counter. He'd heard the conversation and had already made up his mind about this strange visitor. "Buy a car?" He grinned, not hiding his disdain. "Are you sure you're not lost? Or maybe you're just looking for free air conditioning?" The man didn't answer, didn't take offense, didn't snap. He only smiled, softly, as if realizing the ridiculousness of the situation. "Yes, I want to buy a car, and I plan on paying cash." Tim laughed loudly, his laughter like a scathing whip, causing the other salesmen to break away from their conversations and look at the scene. "Cash? For one of our cars? You've got to be kidding me. What are you, from the last century?" The man was silent. His gaze, calm and unwavering, said that he was not joking at all. That calmness was like a dam, holding back the wave of ridicule and contempt that was ready to overwhelm him. Tim crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze sliding over the man from head to toe as if assessing his worth. "Okay, Mr. Wallet, what kind of car do you want to buy? Maybe you should start with a toy model instead of our fleet." The man, disregarding his venomous retort, pointed to the brightest and most expensive car in the room, a red sports car like a heart, beating in the center of this temple of speed. "That one." Tim's eyes widened with surprise and perhaps a touch of consternation, but in the next second he was laughing again, even louder, even more arrogantly. "That's an R5000. It's worth $250,000. Do you even realize that amount of money? You probably didn't even make enough for a bicycle." The other salesmen, energized by his taunts, joined in the laughter, their voices like a pack of hyenas tormenting the silence of the showroom. "He probably thinks he's in a movie. That guy obviously got the wrong door." The man stood motionless, like a rock unaffected by the raging ocean around him. "I said I'd pay cash," he repeated, his voice quiet, but there was a confidence in it that sent an uncomfortable shiver through Tim's body. Tim rolled his eyes, unable to contain his anger. "Okay, show me your cash, buddy. I hope your wallet is the size of a suitcase to hold that amount." The man slowly pulled out his wallet, old and worn, like a relic of a past life. Inside the wallet was a single credit card and a folded piece of paper. "Really? That's it?" Tim laughed so hard his face turned red. "You've got to be kidding me. Go to the toy store if you want to play rich shopper." The man didn't reply. He just returned the wallet to his pocket. "I'm not kidding," he said quietly, but there was a steel core in that quiet voice that made Tim's laughter subside. He pointed to the red sports car like an arrow flying toward its target. Tim shook his head, unable to believe what was happening. "That's the funniest thing I've ever seen in my entire life." The man ignored his words. He slowly approached the car and gently touched its shiny surface, as if hugging an old friend. "Hey!" shouted Tim, taking a step forward as if protecting his precious beast. "Don't touch the car if you don't have money to even pay for a scratch." The man quickly removed his hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice sounding sincere. "It's a beautiful car." "Beautiful? Yes, beautiful," Tim repeated with a sneer. "But such beauty is not for the likes of you," the other salesman whispered, laughing like a pack of hyenas tormenting their prey. Sophia, feeling a prick of conscience, looked on with a mixture of pity and helplessness. "I'm serious about buying this car," the man said again. His voice, despite all the humiliation, remained steady and calm. Tim spread his hands, his face overflowing with irritation. "Oh, are you serious? Well, okay, let's see how you behave behind the wheel of this beauty." He abruptly grabbed the car keys as if pulling the strings of a marionette. "But I'm afraid we can't let you drive our car. What if you wreck it, or worse, steal it?" The man's smile faded a little, but he didn't argue. "I'm not gonna wreck it. I just want to ride." "Hey, boss, can we let this guy test drive the Speedster?" shouted Tim, turning to Mr. Jacobs, the owner of the car dealership. Mr. Jacobs shook his head. He was businesslike and practical and didn't like to take risks. "If anything happens, it will be on your conscience," he warned Tim. Tim turned to the man with triumph. "Sorry, buddy, the test drive is canceled. Rules are rules." The man didn't argue. He just nodded, accepting the rules of the game. "Okay, I understand." He continued to walk around the showroom, looking at the other cars, his movement smooth and calm, as if he wasn't in a showroom being humiliated, but in a museum. The salesman continued to mock him. "Look at him, acting like a car expert," one of them said venomously. "He probably dreams of owning one of these cars someday," another picked up on it. Even some of the customers began to whisper about him. Some laughed quietly, some just shook their heads, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and contempt. The man paid no attention to them, but someone who was observant enough could see a slight sadness flashing in his eyes. Tim, savoring the attention, approached the man again, his smugness reaching a peak. "Look, maybe we should call security to make sure you don't get away in one of our cars?" The man shook his head. "No, we don't. I'd like to talk to the owner of the car dealership, if that's possible." Tim chuckled again. "With the owner? Of course. Mr. Brooks would be thrilled to meet you. Wait here." He stepped aside, his laughter loud and insulting. "He probably wants to show him his imaginary wallet of cash." Sophia, feeling the pain of this humiliation, approached the man who was sitting quietly in the waiting area drinking water. "Sir, would you like anything while you wait?" she asked, her voice quiet and full of sympathy. The man smiled. His smile was warm and sincere. "No, thank you, it's fine." Sophia faltered, her conscience keeping her in suspense. "Why don't you just leave? They're so cruel to you," she pronounced, her voice trembling with pity. "They think you're nobody." The man looked at her, his eyes full of wisdom. "They think you're nothing," he corrected her. His words were quiet, but they cut into her memory like jagged shards of glass. Sophia didn't understand what he meant, but those words were like a heavy weight she carried in her heart. An hour later, Mr. Brooks, the owner of the car dealership, finally showed up. He was a serious man, dressed in a strict suit like an impregnable fortress. Tim ran up to him like a faithful dog ready to report his prey. "Boss, we've got a clown in the parlor. He says he wants to buy a Speedster for cash." Mr. Brooks raised an eyebrow, his gaze cold and ruthless. "Is that so?" he asked, looking at the man. The man stood up and held out his hand. "Yes, I'd like to buy a car today." Mr. Brooks didn't shake the man's hand. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest. "And how exactly do you plan to pay cash for it?" The man replied calmly. Tim snorted, unable to contain his sarcasm. "Show us that cash, buddy." The man pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Mr. Brooks. The man unfolded the paper and stared at it, his face growing paler by the second. "What is it?" Tim asked, his voice sounding tense and incredulous. He tried to look at the paper, but Mr. Brooks wouldn't let him. Mr. Brooks looked up at the man, his hands shaking as if he had seen a ghost. "Is it true?" he whispered, his voice weak and frightened. The man nodded. "Yes." Tim, unable to contain his curiosity, snatched the paper out of Mr. Brooks's hands and looked at it. His eyes nearly popped out of his orbits. It's a bank statement with billions of dollars on it." Silence hung in the room. All eyes were fixed on that paper, as if it were the key to solving some incredible mystery. Mr. Brooks handed the paper back to the man, his voice trembling. "Sir, I didn't know. May I have your name?" The man smiled. His smile was kind and genuine. "Elon Musk," he said, as if he were introducing himself at a friendly party. Tim was stunned. "Elon Musk? The billionaire?" The man nodded. "Yes, that's me." The salesmen's faces changed in an instant, their sneers and scorn instantly replaced by apologies and subservience. "Mr. Musk, we didn't mean to. I apologize," Tim mumbled, his face reddening with embarrassment. "Mr. Musk," Mr. Brooks began, his voice full of nervousness and anxiety, "I didn't mean to." Elon raised his hand, stopping him. "There's no need to apologize. You've already shown me everything I wanted to see." Tim was confused. "What do you mean?" he whispered. Elon's gaze was calm, but there was something to sharpen it, like the blade of a knife. It's not about who has how much money, it's about how you treat people, whether they're rich or poor. The formerly lively saloon fell silent, as if before a storm. All eyes were fixed on Elon Musk, their faces expressing a mixture of fear, shame, and awe. Tim's self-confidence vanished like smoke from a campfire. His mocking smile turned into a nervous twitch, and the laughter disappeared as if it had never existed. Elon slowly looked around at everyone present. "Is this how you treat all the customers who come here?" he asked, his voice soft but shrill. "I didn't realize it was you," Tim mumbled without looking up. "You thought I didn't fit in here?" Elon finished for him, his voice sounding quiet, but his words were like hammer blows punching through defenses. The other salesmen, who had laughed at him before, now looked down at the floor as if they had committed the worst sin. Even Mr. Brooks, the owner, seemed unsure of himself. He didn't know what to say or what to do. Elon walked back to the red car and touched it again, his hands calm and confident. "This car is mine," he said, as if there was no other alternative for him. Tim, trembling, stepped forward, his face twisted with nervousness. "Please, Mr. Musk, allow me to rectify the situation. I will personally handle your purchase." Elon turned to him, his gaze cold and penetrating. "Are you sure you can handle this, Tim, or are you going to laugh at me again?" Tim froze, not knowing what to say. Mr. Brooks, sensing the situation was getting out of hand, quickly cut in. "I assure you, Mr. Musk, this is not how we normally treat our customers." Elon looked at him, his face unreadable. "I appreciate your apology, but actions speak louder than words," he said, his voice calm but filled with bitterness. The other customers who had been silently watching began to whisper. Some felt sorry for Elon for the way he had been treated. Some couldn't believe they were in the presence of such a legendary figure. Tim, desperate to make things right, blurted out, "I'll give you a discount, Mr. Musk. Anything to correct this misunderstanding." Elon raised an eyebrow, his gaze full of sarcasm. "A discount? You think I need a discount?" Tim's face turned crimson. "No, I was just going to say—" Elon raised his hand, stopping him. "What you were going to say doesn't matter. What matters is how you acted," he said, his voice harsh and cold. The room was getting colder and colder by the second. Sophia, the receptionist, looked at what was happening. Her heart was breaking with pain. She regretted that she couldn't say anything that could fix the situation, but even she didn't know what to do. Elon made his way to the waiting area and sat down, his movements smooth and calm as if he were at home. "I'll wait," he said. His words were quiet, but they sounded like a death sentence. As Elon sat in the salon, quiet conversations began. Customers furtively glancing at him, trying to figure out what was going to happen next. Someone even pulled out his cell phone to check his name. "Is that really Elon Musk?" whispered a man to his wife. "Why did the billionaire come here alone?" another asked, his voice sounding surprised. Tim stared at Elon with his hands on the counter, his former confidence vanishing without a trace, leaving fear and powerlessness in its place. He hoped for a chance to apologize again, but Elon didn't even look in his direction. Meanwhile, Mr. Brooks called an emergency meeting with the sales team in the back room. "Do you all realize what just happened?" he asked quietly, but his voice was strained and full of concern. The team nodded silently, their faces expressing fear and remorse. "We made the biggest mistake of our careers," Mr. Brooks pronounced, his voice full of despair. "And now we need to fix it. But how?" No one knew the answer. The tension in the room was so thick, it seemed you could touch it with your hands. Back in the showroom, Elon sat still and drank water from a small paper cup, his relaxed posture only adding to the sense of tension in the air. After what seemed like hours had passed, Elon stood up, and everyone in the showroom watched him anxiously. "I'd like to talk to Tim again," Elon said, and Tim's heart dropped like a stone. Slowly, as if going to an execution, he approached Elon, his legs feeling like absorbent cotton. "Yes, Mr. Musk," he uttered, his voice low and squeezed. Elon looked him straight in the eye. "Tim, do you like your job?" he asked. His voice was soft, but there was a certain menace in it. Tim blinked, his eyes expressing surprise. "Yeah, sure, I love working here," he replied, his voice full of nervousness. Elon nodded, as if agreeing with his words. "Good, then tell me this. Why did you do this to me?" Tim froze, his brain frantically trying to find the right words. "Yeah, I didn't know. If I had known you were Elon Musk, I would have done things differently with you," he muttered, his voice sounding pitiful. "And if I was just a regular person, would you do the same to me?" Elon asked. His words were calm, but there was a sentence in them. Tim didn't know what to answer. His silence spoke louder than any words. Elon sighed and turned to Mr. Brooks. "It sounds like your staff urgently needs training on how to deal with people," he said, his voice sounding firm and determined. Mr. Brooks nodded quickly, his face full of remorse. "You're absolutely right. I'll make sure that happens," he promised, his voice full of pleading. Elon approached the red car. His calm demeanor hadn't changed a bit. "This car is worth $250,000, right?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Mr. Brooks replied in a nervous voice. Elon smiled slightly. His smile was bitter and sad. "Do you know how many people can never even dream of having something like this?" he asked, his gaze directed nowhere. Mr. Brooks nodded, not understanding where he was going. "So, I'm willing to pay cash, but your staff judged me based on my clothes, due to the fact that I didn't look like a typical rich person," Elon said, his words full of resentment. The salesmen exchanged guilty glances, their faces expressing a mixture of remorse and shame. Tim stared at the floor, wishing he could fall through the ground. Elon's voice grew softer. "You know, money doesn't make a person valuable. It's how you treat others that matters most," he said. His words were like a commandment carved on a stone tablet. Elon was a man who valued kindness and respect above all else. Elon turned to Mr. Brooks. "Do you think your staff deserves a second chance?" he asked, his gaze shrewd and hopeful. Mr. Brooks hesitated, his confidence broken. "I believe they have learned their lesson," he replied, his voice full of pleading. Elon looked at Tim. "And you, Tim?" Tim nodded quickly. "Yes, Mr. Musk. I'll never do that again," he muttered, his eyes full of remorse. "I'll give you a chance to prove it," Elon pronounced, and Tim's eyes lit up with hope. "Thank you, sir. I promise I won't let you down." But Elon wasn't finished. "However, I want to test you. I want to see how you will treat others from now on, not just me," he continued. His words were like an ultimatum. Tim turned pale but nodded. "I understand." When Elon was ready to finalize the purchase, he turned to Sophia, who was silently watching. "You've been good to me from the beginning," he said, his voice full of gratitude. Sophia blushed, her eyes full of tears. "I was just doing my job, sir," she whispered. Elon smiled, his smile warm and sincere. "Sometimes doing your job with kindness makes a huge difference," he said. His words were like a blessing. He pulled out his checkbook and wrote something down, then handed Sophia the check. Her eyes widened when she saw the amount, $50,000. "This is a thank you for treating me like a human being," Elon pronounced, and the entire showroom gasped in surprise. Sophia's hands trembled as she tried to hold back tears, her heart filled with gratitude and awe. Elon turned to Mr. Brooks. "I'll buy the car, but only if you promise me you'll change the attitude of your staff," he said, his voice sounding like a sentence. Mr. Brooks nodded quickly. "I promise, Mr. Musk. We'll get this fixed right away." Elon pulled out his credit card, and the transaction was finalized in minutes. But the lesson he left behind would stay with them forever. Before leaving, Elon gathered the entire staff around. "Remember this day," he said. His voice was stern, but there was also hope in it. "It's not about money, it's about respect. Treat everyone with kindness, no matter who they are." The staff nodded, their faces expressing regret and determination to change. Tim stepped forward. "Thank you for giving me a second chance, Mr. Musk. I'll never forget it." Elon gave him a small and sad smile. "I hope you won't forget." The story of Elon Musk's visit to the car dealership quickly spread, with customers sharing their experiences on social media, marveling at his humility and wisdom. "Don't judge a book by its cover," one post read. "You never know who you're talking to." Elon became famous overnight, not because of the cars, but because of a lesson everyone learned. And Elon? He drove away in his shiny red car, leaving behind a story no one will ever forget. His visit was not only a lesson for the car dealership, but also a reminder to everyone that a person's true value lies not in his wealth, but in his kindness and respect for others. And that sometimes the most powerful people have to pretend to be poor to see the true face of those around them.